Okay, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the ALS Therapy Development Institute. We started 1999 with a family that had 3 boys, and the middle son had ALS, and he was only 28 years old. And the family decided it was time to fundraise, and they were hoping to raise $1 million every year and provide that money for ALS research. So as their son Stephen progressed, they were still doing fundraising, but the older brother, Jamie, decided it was time to turn into the foundation into an institute and hired some researchers. And the researchers came from one of the larger pharmaceutical companies here in Boston called Biogen IDEC. And so from 1999 until 2014, where we are now, we have been in 4 different laboratory spaces, each time growing. And Marina and I are sitting in the middle of a conference room in Cambridge, where the laboratory, which I will show her in a few minutes, is 26,000 square feet. And we have 30 plus researchers. They're full-time, they're from around the world with all different programs. And our only mission here at ALS Therapy Development Institute is to find a feasible treatment to end this disease. I became involved because I lost my brother. I lost my brother 4 years ago in 2010. He was diagnosed with ALS, and I didn't know anything about the disease. And then I witnessed what happened with this as he progressed and as he died, and it changed my life. So when I walked into this laboratory and I met the researchers as well as the staff, and they shared their dedication, I said, this is where I want to be. So our mission, as I said, is we only want to solve ALS, and let me tell you how we're doing it. This is a little nerve-wracking. I'm not used to doing that.
It's great.
Let me start backwards. There are 4 different ways we are looking at the treatments. There is in vivo, which is the mouse study, and that has been very successful for us. We use only mice. The mice are called SOD1 mice. SOD1 is the name of a gene. We have found, or researchers have found, that SOD1 is a common cause of ALS within familial, the ALS families that have genetics that cause ALS. So we have 4,000 mice in all different levels under all different experiments. So when we go back to the lab, Marina, I'll show you where we have a certain section where it's called in vitro. And we study the tissue of the mice. And the tissue is sliced up so we can find out where the effective drugs are targeting the specific areas that we want to target to slow down the progression of the disease. The other type of research we're doing is in vivo, and is actually in the mouse itself. And what we won't see, because the laboratory space where the mice are, it's in a clean lab, we can't get back there. Only, I think we have 9 particular researchers that work with them, and they do all the experimenting. The other very exciting piece of research that is now taken off because of the Ice Bucket Challenge, and I know you know, Marina, you know all about the Ice Buckets Challenge, so I'm not going to repeat it, but we have had this additional funding coming into us. Not the millions and millions that ALS Association has, but they really provide a lot of patient services, and we just do the research. But 86% of every single dollar that comes into our lab is used for research only, not overhead, not fundraising, even though we do depend on 152 different families that have fundraisers for us across the country right now to reach our goal. Our goal every year is to raise $10 million, and we need the $10 million each year for our programs to exist and to even move faster. But the newest initiative, I should say, is called our IPS program. I stands for Induced Pluripotent Stem Cell. And what we are doing is we are collecting and gathering stem cells, skin tissue, from people with ALS. And we just sent this out to everybody on August 13th. And we have over 200 patients across the country. And we will provide the funding needed to actually have them come to Mass General Hospital, which is here in Boston. We will collect and gather their stem cells and then turn them into induced pluripotent stem cells so we can categorize them and find all the similarities and differences once we evaluate them. But what is so interesting about the induced pluripotent stem cell program is that we are now moving faster because of all the different additional donations coming in from the Ice Bucket Challenge. We are seeing about 10 times more donations now every day than we had at this time last year. So with the induced pluripotent stem cell program, we are using stem cells. This is where I have to be really clear. We are using these stem cells as research tools. We do not advocate stem cell transplantation at this time because it's still at the very early stages. Yet we look at cell-based research as something that could really make a big difference in the near future. So, getting in, I want to make sure that you understand the difference of who we are versus the other. There's so many different ALS organizations here in the U.S., but we are the only brick and mortar, this is how we place it, the only brick and mortar research lab only dedicated to ALS, not any other disease. And the other big difference is that everyone you see here in our building, in our offices, we all hope maybe within 10 years we'll be looking at different jobs, which would be fantastic. This is a passion for so many of us. Just to give you a background, not only did we lose Stephen Haywood, who is the 28-year-old, I want to make sure that you understand the difference of who we are versus the other. There's so many different ALS organizations here in the U.S., but we are the only brick and mortar, this is how we place it, the only brick and mortar research lab only dedicated to ALS, not any other disease. And the other big difference is that everyone you see here in our building, in our offices, we all hope maybe within 10 years we'll be looking at different jobs, which would be fantastic. This is a passion for so many of us. Just to give you a background, not only did we lose Stephen Haywood, who is the 28-year-old man whose family founded us, then we had a president who came in and wanted to make a big difference because his mother had ALS at that time. She passed. His name was Sean Scott. He was diagnosed 8 months after being here as our president and CEO and died a year later. So there are many people that I work with that not only knew Stephen from 11 years ago, but knew Sean Scott, who ran TDI, and now we have more people that have come here because they have lost loved ones. So the big difference is that there's such commitment here and such dedication, and we all work more than 40 hours a week, more than 60 some of us, but it's like we're addicted. But anyway, the big difference is that we believe research is going to make the difference with this disease. We don't do any of the academic studies of the disease. We leave that to Harvard or to Columbia. And we feel like we are an organization that bridges between the academics that are studying the actual disease and the pharmaceutical companies that are taking the drugs and taking them onto the bigger trials that we can't actually fund when they're talking $30–40 million for a trial. But what we have done over the last 2 years that we're very proud of is that in our lab we discovered there is an FDA-approved drug called Gilenya. Gilenya has been approved for MS patients, multiple sclerosis patients. And what we found with our research in the mouse model is that the mice tended to live significantly longer on this drug than other drugs. So Novartis has helped us and given us the drug, and that right now that particular drug, is in a safety trial, and we should know the results of that by the end of this year, 2014. So our funding which was an additional over $3 million to do that, came from all our fundraising and a big push we had for that particular program. But that's one program out of probably the 20 to 25 projects we do each and every year. And until I got into this area, I had no idea the expenses of research. So that just gives you one little example of what we're doing here. We are funded, as I said, not any government funding, but from families across the country, across the U.S. And they've all been affected by ALS in some way. Some of the events are small dinner parties where it's a spaghetti dinner, and we probably get $1,000 or less. And then some are huge, big bashes or galas where they do raise $300,000 to $400,000 for a night on a silent auction items and dinners or what have you. So we struggle to get to that 10 million every year, but that's a goal that we need to continue until we can find a treatment. So anyway, I think in a nutshell, Marina, that gives me all the stuff that I wanted to tell you, and now I'd love to take you through the lab. So it's interesting hearing that type of population in Moscow as well are very active people, and they've been strong, and all of a sudden they're struck down by this disease. And then typically we still say that a person with ALS, we call them PALS, P-A-L-S. We understand that many patients don't want to be considered patients. They're still people with ALS that have a disability, and we're cognizant of that. But typically still, it's between 2 and 5 years people typically pass. More recently, I understand, and I don't know the research behind this, that patients that are diagnosed in Israel tend to live, 20% of them live 10 years or longer.
It's different time.
It's just significant. Why is that? Is it because neurologists are able to diagnose people so much earlier? Or what is it that they're doing that they can prolong their lives? Yet we also know that it's always fatal. And there could be 5 people with ALS sitting here in this room, and each of them have very, very different symptoms. So it's very interesting. Yeah. So I'd love to show you the lab, because I'm going to be moved in. There was a company here named Tolerex, and unfortunately they went defunct, and this was empty space. And the landlord, who was our landlord, needed to fill it because we were cramped in our old space, and they needed to update that, renovate that, and increase the rent, and we couldn't afford it. So they brought us in here. On the wall here, Marina, this is the chairman of our board. His name is Augie Nieto, and his wife Lynn. He was diagnosed 8 years ago with ALS and lives in California. So since he's been diagnosed, he's raised $47 million. And his initiative was called Augie's Quest, which helped fund MDA, which is Muscular Dystrophy Association. And then we got a piece of that pie. As of January this year, he decided he wanted to focus more of all his efforts directly here. So we're very pleased. Augie was the co-founder of a company called Life Fitness. Telling you about the family with the 3 sons. Stephen Haywood is the one, of course, in the wheelchair, and his older brother Jamie is still very involved on our board. And they're the family that started ALS TDF, a foundation at that time, but now we're the institute. So Jamie and Stephen Haywood. Hi, how are you? I'm Terry. Nice to meet you. Find people that have walked these halls. Some have, a lot have passed. I just know a few, not all of them, but this is our newest board member. Her name is Jenny Dwyer, and this is her husband Pat and their children. The children and Jenny still live in Yakima, Washington, the state of Washington. Our only mission is to discover and develop effective treatments. Corey Reach also lives in California, and when he was a junior in college, he was diagnosed with ALS. He's now 27 years old, and his family, the Reach family, they're out in San Francisco, also huge supporters of what we do, and we're hoping that we'll be able to tell Corey someday we have something for him that'll help save his life. The pictures of different events that go on. This happens in Nantucket. It's called the Big Game Battle, and it's all about fishing. And they raised $100,000 just last weekend for research. Team Mustangs. This gentleman passed last year, but it's a huge bike ride in Minnesota, and usually they raise probably between $150,000 and $200,000 for each bike ride, and they do that every year in May. So, and then we have a huge bike ride. It's called the Tri-State Trek, which is a 3-day, and this year was phenomenal. We had 240 riders and raised over $700,000. So each rider is committed to raise $1,800 for research. A number of families. I love that picture. This is a gentleman who was diagnosed. This is about 6 months before he was diagnosed, on vacation with his mom, just laughing and enjoying life. We're going to go down here. The offices on this side are a combination of Dr. Lincecum, one of our head researchers, our events people that help all the different events across the country with websites. We've set up their websites on our website so people can go directly and donate on the website. Matvey Lukashev. That makes
It's
is that when we go through the lab, just don't touch anything.
No.
And it's not contaminated. It's just that everything is so organized the way the researchers need it. So come on in. Now I think this is pretty interesting. We started the research back in 2000. And a lot of the research is looking at mouse tissue and trying to analyze whether the drug therapies that we evaluate are hitting specific targets. Everything that started way back when is categorized and stored in these freezers. So this is information from 12 years ago. So what happens if researchers remember or they want to look up a certain type of experiment that was done, let's say 6 years ago, they come to this computer, and each researcher, as you can see, has a barcode. They plug in their barcode and they actually can look up what tissue sample they're looking for, and the tissue sample will show up as a location. It will tell you exactly which freezer. I think we have 10 freezers and there's just 5 right here now. But which freezer actually has that tissue sample, and if they needed to re-look at that or reanalyze it, it's available. That's great. Which is not available for us to go at all. It's another huge section of the animal facility. And I had mentioned to Marina, we have like 4,000 mice. All the mice are given or injected with 22 copies of a gene called SOD1. So when we receive them here in the lab, they come from another lab in Maine. When we receive them here, they are already showing ALS-like symptoms. So we know that they're already progressing along, and they come about day 30 when they're about 30 days old. So, but they're back there, so a lot of the experiments, the in vivo experiments, when they're experimenting exactly with the mouse, is done back there. And unfortunately, we can't get in there. The president that I had told you about, Sean Scott, with his wife, he was a president for just a short time before he was diagnosed with ALS. And told you about the induced pluripotent stem cell program, which has been phenomenal because of all the additional money coming in from the Ice Bucket Challenge. All of those experiments and everything is done behind here. Again, an area that we can't go in, but you can peek in the window. It's the cell-based research, and I believe we have right now 4 different specialists that fall under Matvey Lukashev's group. So, idea of at the very end, there's a picture of the lab where we came from, and it's just amazing to see how much more space we have. Where we used to be 3 resort of the in vitro experiments. So that's in the Petri dishes. So that's when they actually take the tissue from the mice, and with the microscopes or any of this other equipment, they are actually analyzing it. So that happens all around here. Conference room. So many people have given us quotes on why they believe support is needed here at ALS TDI. On the left-hand side, this is kind of our history. This is the family that I had talked about. This is the mom, Peggy Haywood, and her son, and his wife, Stephen, and his wife, Wendy. And then this is our very beginnings back in 2000 with just 5 researchers. And Fernando and Ken are still here with us. They were very good friends of Stephen. As I mentioned, it used to be called the Foundation, but now with the research we're doing, it's an institute. This gives you an idea, just a small idea, of where all the mice are kept and how we have to, there's every single day, on the weekends included, somebody's here to manage them and clean the cages and everything else that needs to be done. So as we go along, this was our lab, so this was lab number 3, but this gives you an idea of how crowded. In these little alleyways, 3 people sat doing their experiments, and now we have this room, which is great. So, Rainu and Monica are different researchers.